Welcome back to Chapter 16. In this unit, we're going to be looking all about domestic policy. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to define that term. What does domestic policy mean? We're going to take a real bird's eye look at this topic before we start diving into some of the specifics and some of the real details on the next video. So what is public policy? Well, of course, that's our goal for this week. And for each of these videos, what I'll be doing is kind of giving you a bit of an overview about where we're going in the video. So some of the goals for this particular video, this portion of the lecture, I want to first define what we mean when we say public policy. What is it? What the heck is public policy? So that'll be the first thing that we're going to do. We're going to look at some other ways of understanding public policy. Now, when we look at our textbook, it goes into a number of different ways of how you would describe public policy. And so we're going to cover the official one first, but then they also kind of give us some other things to think about as we're going through. And finally, some of you are thinking about career options, right? Maybe some of you want to go on and work in this field. Maybe you want to work in government. Maybe you want to, we've been talking all semester long about, the United States government. Maybe you want to work for the government. There's a lot of people who do. Over 2 million Americans work for the government. So you might be interested in studying public policy going forward. And we'll spend a few minutes talking about some of the career possibilities for somebody who wants to actually study this topic. How does that sound? Hopefully it sounds great. We're going to dive right in. And let's do this first. Let's talk about public policy in terms of the definition. So our textbook, I'm not going to lie, when you look at the definition in the textbook, it can be a little confusing to narrow down on what the heck public policy actually is. The best description that our textbook gives is this. It says, it's the broad strategy that government uses to do its job. And what are we talking about here? Well, there's all kinds of people in the government, and they're all working together to operate the government. And there's certain rules that are in place. And those rules come from all kinds of different people and places. Some of those rules are the laws that are passed by Congress. Some of the rules are, some of the policies that are put in place by the president and by his executive bureaucracy, kind of saying, this is the things that we're going to do. You have the courts weighing in, and the courts are saying, this is legal and constitutional, this is illegal and unconstitutional. And so you have all of these different people within government, and they're all working together to operate the government with one another. There's no one set of rules that we can go to. It's really more like a strategy where all of these people are working together to implement the perspective of the government. So we're going to dive into that a little bit more in just a second. When we're talking about public policy, what we're talking about is that these are issues of concern to a large segment of society. It's not just one individual or small group of people. What does that mean? Well, if the lights go off in my house and, it's not affecting anybody else, but my power's out, I'm going to call up somebody, a power company. They're regulated by the government. They're going to send somebody out to the house and fix it. That's not an act of public policy. This is just one thing affecting me. But if the whole county of Los Angeles is without power for weeks on end because of something that the government is doing or not doing, that's going to be an issue of public policy. Why? It's affecting a lot of people out there, okay? So the policies have to change. The work of government has to change to address that. So you're going to see that first, public policy, it's going to be applicable to a wide variety of people, to a lot of different people, not just one individual or small group. Another example that our textbook goes into is, let's say that the government forgives your loans. Maybe you're taking out some loans for school, and the government says, this person right here, we're going to pay off their loans, and it's just you. That's not an example of public policy either. You could have, some sort of process for loan forgiveness for a lot of different people. Maybe everybody who makes under a certain amount of money gets their loans forgiven. That's public policy. It's going to have this broad reach and affect a lot of different people. Now, we also talked about the idea that it's not just one person or one even branch of government that is shaping public policy. It's all of these different people and branches working together. It's the work of the government happening in statute, happening in law, happening in court cases, happening in the way that these executive bureaucracies implement their rules and so forth. There's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of hands in the pot, so to speak. And so not only are there a lot of people involved, there's a lot of compromise involved. You'll find that when things change, they happen over years and years, and you've got all kinds of input from interest groups to professional organizations to people out in the public. They all have a say in what's going on. Later in the lecture, we're going to be looking at the example of Obamacare. Back during President Obama's first term in office, he tried to get new laws passed about healthcare, how to do healthcare in the United States. And it was a huge bill. But they couldn't just take everything and start over from scratch. We had to work within the existing structures. You know, doctors and nurses had something to say about the bill. So did insurance companies. So did all the people who already get their health care from their employer, like me. You know, I come to work and they give me health benefits. And that's the case for most Americans. So there's all of these constraints when government is, you know, implementing new policies. They have to think about all of these different people who are going to be affected, and all of those people also get to weigh in. And in some way, shape, or form, they help to shape the policy of the government. So that's a very long-winded way of saying public policy is the broad strategy. You're saying there's a lot of people involved. It's that strategy that the government is using to do its job. Okay. I also think that we should go over this term, which is domestic policy. Sometimes you'll hear about foreign policy, and sometimes you'll hear about domestic policy. Foreign policy, when we talk about that, what we're talking about is the way that it's interacting and relating to other countries. So foreign policy is going to be, you know, what does our relationship with Mexico look like? What is our relationship with Canada and China and the United Kingdom? What does that look like? What is our trade with them? You know, are we having good diplomatic relations with them or not? Now, when we talk about domestic policy, we're not talking about other countries at all. We're talking about what's happening within the borders of the United States. Okay, so areas of concern, areas of national importance for people here living in the United States, things like poverty. You know, are people falling into poverty, or do we have help for them? What's the crime levels? Do we have too much crime? Is there, are there issues with policing that we need to address? How about the environment? Are we polluting our rivers and our air? These are all of the things that when we think about domestic policy, we're really looking at what's happening within the borders of the United States. So know the difference between domestic policy and foreign policy, because that's where we're going to be for most of the week. We're going to be looking at the domestic stuff. Now, our textbook does talk about some other ways to think about public policy. And one of the first ways they talk about is this idea of public policy as outcomes. Our textbook says things like, you know, the work of government is not a secret. And there's a reason why it's not a secret. If you're a politician and you're doing a really good job, you're going to go out there and you're going to tell everybody, look at all this great stuff I'm doing. You should definitely reelect me. Look, I've improved your life in 1, 2, 3, 4 different ways. And if you're not doing so good, the opposition will come out and say, look at the person here, you know, they're in government and they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and we really need to get this person out of office. So one of the things that came to mind as I was reading that is not too long ago, I was driving around LA County and I pulled up to the gas station. And in recent weeks and months, the price of gas has gone up pretty high. And I know everybody's feeling it at the pump. And so I pulled up to the gas pump and I saw this sticker there. It says, you know, you got Joe Biden, he's pointing, and it says, I did that. And it was pointing at the price of gas. And so when you think about outcomes, you think about the praise or blame that governments get. This is an example of it, right? And this is a case of somebody putting the sticker there that is essentially blaming the government, saying the government is to blame for the high gas prices. And, you know, with this particular sticker, they're saying Joe Biden in particular is to blame for the high gas prices. So we can think about the outcomes as an expression of public policy. Outcomes are things like, what is the price of gas? What is the health of the economy? What's inflation look like? Are people working? Do they have good jobs? Do they have health care? Those are all the outcomes, right? So public policy, it's the outcomes. What's the outcome of the action of the government? And we can see the outcomes as being an expression of public policy, because these are the things that the government's trying to do. Maybe sometimes they're not even trying to do it. It just happens as something that's unintended, but that's public policy as well. So the government, the people in charge, like President Biden, will either take praise or blame, depending on how well or poorly they're perceived to have done in their role. Okay, they also talk about this. winners and losers. Sometimes you can think about public policy as winners or losers. Who's going to win? Who's going to lose? Why do we say that? Well, think about taxes, okay? Some people have to pay a lot in taxes. They probably don't like that very much. They probably feel like that's not fair that they're paying that much in taxes, or they probably, at the very least, even if they think it's fair, they probably wish they had that extra money to go spend how they want to spend it, right? And so you could think of that person as being a loser in that situation, that the government is taking something from them. But somebody else might get something, you know? Look, we're all here at this public school. LA Harbor College is a public school. And we're all, here taking classes. My salary is paid from that. In some ways, there are people like yourself and like me who are benefiting from the tax dollars that are funding our education here. So there are winners and losers, and oftentimes people are winners in some ways and losers in other ways when it comes to public policy. So public policy is going to promote certain types of behavior. It's going to punish other types of behavior. Some people are going to benefit from that more than others. And we can kind of think about public policy sometimes in a win or lose situation, although it's probably not my favorite way to think about it. Although we can use that frame or that lens to look at it. Okay, so by now, I hope you kind of have just a general sense of what public policy means. It's this broad strategy that government uses to, enact its goals. It's the outcomes of different laws. It's the outcomes of different actions of government that affect all of our lives for better or for worse. Okay. Now, you might be looking at, your next 5 or 10 years into the future and saying, what am I going to do for work? Maybe you want to work for the government, or maybe you really liked this class. I hope you did. Maybe you really like this class and you want to continue studying stuff like this. Well, did you know that you can earn actually a master's degree in public policy? So the whole topic that we're talking about this week, you can actually go and get a graduate degree in that field. And a master's degree in public policy is going to prepare you to do a lot of different kind of work that's related to the work of government. Understanding the laws, understanding the policies, understanding how nonprofits, businesses, and the government can all use that information and really try to navigate all of that stuff. And so somebody who goes and gets their degree in public policy, they're going to be studying a lot of different fields, everything from politics, statistics, how to analyze data, maybe even political philosophy and some history. And when these people graduate, they tend to go on to work in a number of different places. Now, some of them go on to work for businesses or as consultants. Businesses also really need to understand the government policies because they have to navigate all of that stuff. If you're going to have a business, you're going to have to abide by the government rules. But a lot of people go into working for the government. Like half of graduates here, they're working for state, local, or national government. They might be employed by a politician. Maybe they work on that politician's staff. You also have a lot of people that go on to work for nonprofits. So a nonprofit organization, they're out there trying to work on certain policies or trying to help certain groups and populations. And so these nonprofits also employ a lot of people with a master's in public policy. There's all kinds of things people can do once they get into a role. They can specialize, they can work in communications, or they can consult with people trying to tell them what are the best strategies to go forward. They can research, they can be an analyst, they can, as I said before, be a staff or an elected official. So if you're thinking about these topics and you like this kind of stuff, you might consider, go to the Career Center here at LA Harbor College and ask about what are some of the fields, what are some of the ways that you could do this kind of work in government. We need good people like you to be in government doing the work of government. Okay, so I really want to encourage you as you're thinking about your career goals, think about Master in Public Policy. And of course, if you ever have any questions about any of that stuff, I'm always happy to answer. Now, going forward, we're going to kind of pivot into looking at the real nuts and bolts, the real specifics, especially as it pertains to social policy and economic policy. So I'm going to end it here, and I'll see you at the next one. Hopefully you have a good sense from this video what public policy means and what we're talking about when we talk about public policy and domestic policy.